Today, I want to talk about the religion of broken telephone. We're going to discuss what is called by the scholars of Islam the proofs of Islam, specifically the Hadith. We're going to explain what Hadith are in Islam, how they prove the prophethood of Muhammad, and what the terms surrounding Hadith actually are. Things like mutawatir. What is mutawatir? And then we'll also discover why Muslims say that the Bible is corrupted. They're not using the same concept that we're using. They're not using the same criteria we're using, and they don't tell us this. I hope this will be a very useful guide to you on Islamic doctrine. And of course, when we're done, please drop your comments down below. I'll be happy to answer, happy to engage. I will be covering the same presentation on Saturday, the 3rd of October, with Thaddeus of Reasoned Answers Apologetics, and Io of the Third Apology will be on Thaddeus's channel, Reasoned Answers Apologetics. Okay, let's begin. The sources that I'm using for this is 1. A video called The Proofs in Islam, 14 different types of hadith, mutawatir, mashhur, and ahad. That's the link, but you should be able to find it using this title. I'm also going to be using the Tafsir Sahih Bukhari, the Fath al-Bari, by Imam Asqalani. Imam Asqalani is one of the most revered scholars in Islam. He has the title of Sheikh al-Islam, which has only been given to 28 scholars in the 1400 years of Islam. There's only one title higher than Sheikh al-Islam, and that was given to Imam Ghazali, who was the only Muslim scholar to receive the title that he received. Now this book, what's interesting is that most people don't know that there are tafsir, just like we have exegesis of the Quranic verses. Like people will have heard of things like Tafsir Ibn Kathir or Tafsir al-Jalalain, which are major scholarly discussions around and commentaries on the verses of the Quran. Very few people know they are actually tafsir written about the hadith. For instance, Tafsir Sahih Bukhari was written by Medina Munawwara and Al-Azhar, Egypt. Of course, most of you will be aware that Al-Azhar in Egypt is the oldest Islamic university and seminary in the world. It's 1,000 years old. It is the most respected one. And this is of course why when Barack Obama went to Egypt to kowtow to the Muslim Brotherhood, he went to Al-Azhar. Medina Munawwara is of course the highly respected Medina University in Saudi Arabia. So the two top Islamic seminaries in the world created this book, which is a translation of the Tafsir Sahih Bukhari by Asqalani, the Fath al-Bari. We'll discuss more about that later, and of course we'll be using the Reliance of the Traveller, the Umdat al-Salik, which is the classic manual of Islamic sacred law, a Sharia manual, the most popular one in the world. And we'll be using this as reference. Islam and fun facts. Of course, you do realize that if you study the Sharia, you'll learn that humor is semi-illegal in Islam. You're not supposed to tell jokes. But since this is Islam, which is a joke, let's talk about this. Tustari was also near to the Islamic scholars of Hadith. When he met Abu Dawood, he said, "Oh, Abu Dawood, I want something from you." He said, "What is it?" Tustari said, "On a condition that you say that you will fulfill it, if possible." Abu Dawood replied in the affirmative. Tustari said, "Get out your tongue with which you narrated the hadiths of the Prophet, so that I may kiss it." Abu Dawood accepted, and Tustari kissed his tongue. Hashtag no homo. Tustari is the author of the well-known Tafsir Tustari, his commentary on an interpretation of the Quran. Tustari is a very well-known scholar in Islam, and he maintained that the Quran contained several levels of meaning, which included the outer or zahir and the inner or the batin. Now the key idea that he unraveled was the meaning of the Prophet Muhammad's saying, "I am he and he is I," save that I am I and he is he. He referring to Allah. So Muhammad apparently said, "I am he and he is I." In other words, I am Allah and Allah is me, save that I am I and he is he. And he explained it as a mystery of union and realization at the center of the saint's personality, called the sir, the secret, or the heart, where existence joins being. Tustari was also the first to put the Sufi exercise of remembrance of Allah, or dhikr, on a firm theoretical basis. Now, tasbih, literally meaning glorification, which is the saying of Subhanallah, is a form of dhikr. There are several verses in the Quran that emphasize the importance of remembering the will of Allah by saying phrases such as Insha'Allah and Allah knows best, and if it is Allah's will. This is the basis for dhikr. Muhammad said the best dhikr is, there is no deity but Allah, and the best supplicatory praise, Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to Allah. So he took these things and he then made this a tradition in Islam that people now follow. Make of this little hadith what you will. The references are below and you can look this up for yourself. Now, what are the proofs of Islam? The proofs of Islam refer to the proofs that the mujtahids, the most qualified scholars of Islam, rely on when they deduce and they describe the rules of Islam. These proofs are the Quran, which is the book of Allah, the Sunnah of the Prophet, which would be the Hadith, but also the Sirah or the Surah. Then of course you have the Ijma, the consensus, which is the consensus of the Ummah, but is really more specifically the consensus of all of the scholars of Islam. We'll dig more into that. And of course, Qiyas, comparative analogy, which is the deducing of a judgment for a particular case based upon similarities to a case that is mentioned explicitly in the religious texts. These are supposed to be secondary sources of Islamic law. However, in practice, Ijma, the consensus, is the primary source of law in Islam. It is the analysis and the final interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. And this has now become the final consensus and formed the Sharia, and of course the Fiqh, which is the law of Allah and the application of that law to the life of the Muslim and the Muslim culture and society. The secondary sources are supposed to be human reasoning, and we're going to do a very basic overview. So we have reasoning, which is called ijtihad. Then we have the consensus. Then we have deduction by analogy, which is called qiyas, which I've just described in the previous slide. And of course, deduction by logic, which they call akal. To define the consensus, and I say this is a very basic overview because this is a large topic, and for reasons of time, we won't go into every aspect of it. If a legal solution is neither available in the Quran nor in the Sunnah, then Islam allows Muslims to find a solution which is agreed upon and accepted by the majority of Muslims, of course. Typically, though, it is the majority of the scholars. The average Muslim doesn't have much say in the consensus. The word derives from jama, to unite or add, and in legal terms it means a procedure through which any principle of law is formulated by unanimous opinion. It has also been defined as the unanimous agreement of Muslim jurists in a particular age on a particular question of law. In the Sharia, and it is Sharia law, that the Muslim community can never be in error. In fact, it is the consensus, it is commonly accepted in Islam that the Islamic community can never be in error. Allah will not allow that. And of course, this contention, this assumption that they can never, ever be in error or make a mistake is supported by both Quranic verses and Hadith proofs. This is a quotation out of Brill, the Encyclopedia of Islam, which tells us about ijma, and it says in law it is the third, and in practice the most important of the sources of legal knowledge, being the unanimous agreement of the community on a regulation imposed by Allah. Technically, ijma is the unanimous doctrine and opinion of the recognized religious authorities. However, we need to understand Islam is a legal religion. Your ulama, your scholars, are lawyers. They are jurists. Lawyers, not priests. So it's a legal religion. It's a form of law. It doesn't meet the same criteria as we have in terms of Christianity. It's legislation rather than a personal religion. The Brill Encyclopedia of Islam is the standard worldwide reference on Islam, used even in Islamic universities. And of course, to buy a copy, you're welcome to do that. It will cost you about $38,000. So, a word in the ijma, the consensus. So we have Jamia Tirmidhi, Hadith 2167. Indeed, Allah will not gather my ummah, or he said, Muhammad's ummah, upon deviation, and Allah's hand is over the jama'ah, which is the group, and whoever deviates, he deviates to the hellfire. Let's expand that into what we find in the Sharia. Allah's hand is over the group, meaning his protection and preservation of them, signifying that the collectivity of the people of Islam are in Allah's fold. So in other words, we as non-Muslims are not protected by Allah. We are not under the protection, guidance, or the wing of Allah. So be also in Allah's shelter in the midst of them, and do not separate yourself from them. The rest of the hadith, according to the one who first recorded it, being Tirmidhi, is whoever dissents from them departs to hell. Meaning that whoever diverges from the overwhelming majority concerning what is lawful or unlawful, and on which the community does not differ, has slipped off the path of guidance, and this will lead him to hell, the Jami al-Saghir is a treatise on law in Islam. In addition to its general interest as a formal legal opinion, not religious, legal, interesting, legal opinion, not a religious opinion, the following serves in the present context to clarify why other than the four Sunni schools of jurisprudence do not play a role in scholarly consensus. Ibn Salah reports that there is scholarly consensus on its being unlawful to follow rulings from schools other than those of the four imams. So those would be the four prominent schools of fiqh in Islam: the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Maliki, and the Shafi'i. It is quite otherwise with the four schools, whose imams have spent themselves in checking the positions of their schools, explaining what could be rigorously authenticated as the position of the person it was attributed to and what could not be. In other words, utilizing proofs. Their scholars have thus achieved safety from textual corruption and have been able to discern the genuine from the poorly authenticated. Proof of the legal authority of scholarly consensus is that just as Allah has ordered the believers in the Quran to obey Him and His Messenger, so too He has ordered them to obey those of authority, the Ulul al-Amr, among them, saying, "O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Prophet and those of authority among you." Quran 4:59.